And we're the Ghouls Next
The ghouls
Door.
next door.
Hi. Uh, Welcome to the Ghouls Next Door with live election coverage.
Yeah,
We're doing it.
it's a
Yes.
stressful time. We're here.
Yes, yes, definitely a stressful time. 2020, that's what it means to vote and, and exist in this world right now. For people who don't know who the Ghouls are, we are a media analysis show with a horror lens. So we explore different topics and the horrors of them and also loop them back to horror films and, dissect those as well. Given the state of what 2020 is, it made sense that we would talk about the horrors of elections. So today we're going to talk a bit about some of the challenges and what makes this race kind of scary and stressful for a lot of us. I hope that you all are going out, you're voting, you're getting your provisional ballot if you are challenged in any way for voting at the machines, that you're dropping off your mail-in ballots, and that you are, exercising your right to vote and try to make a change in this time. So we'll talk about some of those things, and we're also going to be exploring the film Purge Election Year, which is the third in the franchise of the Purge, to talk about some of the challenges with film in representation, which is also translated to the real world and how certain groups of people are being neglected or not counted as much as the rest of the population. So we will talk about facts first, and then we'll dive into film. So I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Kat, to talk to us about some really cool and also scary election challenges.
Yeah. Can y'all hear me okay? Everything good? Cool.
Yeah.
So the election's scary, in that there's a long history of voter suppression. There's a long history of trying to silence individuals. And some of them could be taking place today while you are at the polls. So if you're running into problems, there's actually a number you can call. It's 866 our vote, or 866-687-8683. Essentially, you can like ask some questions if you're at the polls and someone gives you some trouble and you're like, I don't know if I have the right to do this, and they can answer that for you. Um, but yeah, voter suppression has been happening for a minute. I feel like that shouldn't be surprising to people, um, in the fact that like America in general has suppressed the majority of its population to benefit cis white men, and to keep the patriarchy in check. They're like, how can
Yes.
we keep this going? This benefits a specific group. Let's just keep that group happy, everyone else sad. What's the best route to that? And there's a lot of things. Specifically, you'll probably see, depending on where you are at, the voting rules are different for every state. So you could live somewhere, move, and then have no idea what your rights are in terms of voting
Mhm.
because it's really different state by state. And honestly, like who you get when you are at the polls. So, like, who is the person behind the table can also kind of impact that, as well as folks who are standing outside trying to dissuade people from entering. Gabe, I feel like you told me the story about the lady who was like, just go home and mail them. And it was like, there's a day left to do
Yeah.
that. Don't go home. Stand in line. It sucks, but vote, man. Um,
Yes.
but I have a short list of restrictions that basically are put on to voters to make sure that they don't get out there. So if you are falling victim to this, it's good to know what they are. A big one that we've seen the ACLU fight a bunch of times, but actually does exist in a lot of places, are voter ID laws that basically are exactly what they say they are. They require an ID at the polls. 7 states in the country have strict voter ID laws, while lots of others have more loose ones, and it's been fought as like a rights violation because photo IDs are not something that everyone has. I know I only have a passport. I don't have a state ID. And if you don't have a state ID, you can actually be prevented from voting. And it's actually said that it reduces the amount of voter turnout by 2 to 3% points, equaling like
Yeah.
tens of thousands of people.
And to have an ID, you also need a place of residence. And so, with
Hmm.
Philadelphia having a large unhoused community, it means that some of them might not have those IDs as well.
For sure. So you're basically eliminating anyone who is homeless, anyone who is experiencing, the kind of less spoken of homelessness, which is like going from house to house, but like you don't have a permanent residence of your own. And anyone that they're kind of like trying to silence, if you think about it that way. People in shelters, etc. There's also
Mm-hmm.
lots of registration restrictions that is one of the most common forms of voter suppression. Basically, documentation that people don't just carry around. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't just carry around my birth certificate with me to prove my citizenship on the daily. I'm not just like, I got that really important document in my pocket so that it's really easy to lose.
Yeah.
So it's basically you've seen a lot of politicians, specifically Trump and other Republican candidates, specifically call out this whole voter fraud theory. Like they're really
Mm-hmm.
trying to make people that their votes aren't going to be counted or that votes from certain people will be counted and that's bad. So you'll see a lot of like specific like targeting of immigrant populations, anyone who has a felony, which I'll get into kind of down the line, and anyone who's like basically in poverty, because a lot of the documents that are required are things that do cost money. You have to like financially back them if you have to get a passport or if you don't just have your birth certificate, having to reorder one. Those things are expensive and take a significant amount of time. But it has been something that has kind of been there for a minute, especially this proof of citizenship kind of end to it, where they're really just trying to scare away people. And it actually, in Kansas, it blocked 30,000 people from voting in 2011. So that's like a pretty significant.
Yes.
There's also laws that basically make it so back in the day when we only had paper ballots and you couldn't do things technology wise, you would have to register to vote 25 days in advance. I think a large flaw with a lot of our policies in our country is that they're old and they were made for a time that no longer exists. So specifically, the law in New York, they have a law that you have to register at least 25 days in advance. I know that's the case in a lot of places that you have to register like by early October in order to qualify to vote in November. And the reason that was done is because you used to have to do it by hand and there wasn't a computer to process all the information coming in. So it's kind of archaic.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically in New York, it blocked 90,000 voters who were unable to make the 250-day cut or 25-day cutoff in 2016. So that's 90,000 voters that could have kept Trump out of office. Um, Something that I don't have on my list that just reminds me of something that's going on right now, specifically with Trump, is that he's trying to do like signature checks. So if you had a different signature the year before when you were signing off for your vote, that they could not count that vote because your signatures don't match. Um, and other things that just kind of like are really back. Like it's people are going to vote and their vote should count. I feel like if anyone's going to the polls and they're putting in that time, their vote should count. And I don't understand really this fear that people have. They're like, oh, people are voting. That's a problem. Like, why is that the
Yeah,
energy
like
that
let's keep
exists?
well, I mean, because I think that really speaks to the power of the people and that their right to be afraid. Like, if the system is improved in the future so that, votes are counted a bit more equally, as, we'll talk later in this segment. But it is that clearly voter suppression exists because it is obvious and has been since the beginning of us picking how to pick our president and how we, first started, restricting certain people of specific demographics from being able to vote because they knew how powerful that vote is. They knew that they could change and swerve an election. Specifically, there are these states that are so important, the swing states, because of the diversity of the population. Like we don't know what's going to happen, and I think that's a part of the beauty of what makes America. But it's also like there's so many things in place like you're going through, because they don't want people to be able to vote. So we have all these things in place, to hold these folks back. It's also like here in Philadelphia, and I'm sure in other places too, one of the challenges is for Latina voters, right, is having access to the information in their native language. So if you are bilingual, but primarily your native language is Spanish, if you don't have that information, like you don't know what to do for the questions that are on the ballot, besides like the basics of like who's president, you could be at a disadvantage and maybe even be discouraged to vote. And that's just one of the ways, is just withholding information or not making it as accessible. Yeah, and that's just like one of the many things that were going on about. But there are also, these other ways that they're holding back the IPOC communities.
Yeah, one huge one, which we've talked about on our show previously, is this whole felony disenfranchisement, where it is a fact that through the war on drugs, the BIPOC communities have been gutted to funnel into this like prison industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole end of that is that there are a handful of states that basically say if you have been convicted of a felony, you lose your voting rights. And if that is targeting a specific community, specifically like Black Americans, uh, they are being faced with this more than any other group because of the fact that they've intentionally been targeted to receive felony charges, essentially, through the war on drugs and other initiatives to target Black Americans. But basically, that was an intentional step to keep them from voting because these felony disenfranchisement laws exist. And
Mm-hmm.
the toughest thing is like so many states have different rules. So different states have different laws. Some ban only during incarceration, some for life, others while on probation or parole, and others only while they are incarcerated. So, like states like Maine and Vermont don't disenfranchise people with felony convictions at all, but also don't have large populations of those individuals generally in their population because they're primarily white communities or you know non-black communities. But we see kind of this drastic change between all these different states. It makes it really confusing. Um, and all of it was designed specifically around like Jim Crow America. It's all rooted kind of back to that, where these systems are made intentionally to block black votes. So specifically, they used to do poll taxes, literacy tests, and other barriers. So when they were no longer able to do that, this is their new way of blocking people. So to this
Mm-hmm.
day, the states with the most extreme disenfranchisement laws basically are Iowa. Iowa was big on the list, and basically give permanent disenfranchisement. So if you have been convicted of a felony, you will never have voting rights again if you live in
That's so
Iowa. And
interesting
as we know
about
about,
Iowa.
yeah,
Only because when I was
and
in
as we know
line
about like
for
Connor
three
County.
hours, sorry, when I was in
Oh
line for
gosh,
3 hours because I was trying to get my vote and I had problems with my mail in ballot and I was trying to get my provisional ballot, behind me for those 3 hours was a woman from Iowa who talked about how easy it was for her to go and vote and was very much, negligent to the fact that there are these challenges specifically in place for people who did not look like her. And so the whole time I was like, you're in a line in South Philadelphia for 3 hours because because of all of these systems in place and you're not really thinking about it. And I'm sorry that Iowa was
yeah,
easy on you, lady. But that was an
yeah,
experience of the different, like we were living two different realities.
mm-hmm. And Iowa specifically, there's it's the most disproportionately incarceration rate of Black Americans, and specifically estimated 1 in 4 voting age Black men are disenfranchised by the system that live in Iowa. And I think it ties back to that whole haunted house thing. Once you buy the house, you don't just
Mm-hmm.
leave if you don't have the financial capacity to do so. So for anyone who's like, don't live in Iowa then. It's not that easy. I mean, you have a system that's been intentionally leaving people in poverty for hundreds of years. It's not so easy to just uproot your entire life and switch states, especially if the education system as it is does not make you aware that that is exactly the root cause. Like, no one's
Mm-hmm.
just like reading these statistics on the daily, I feel. Like, we did research for this episode specifically because we're talking about the election. But like, I did not know all of these facts beforehand. I knew some, but not. So it's like if you're thinking about like how deep rooted the problem is, it really goes back, and I feel like you can't just leave. That's not the easiest thing. That's not
Mm-hmm.
like the go-to. So Iowa sucks. People probably shouldn't live there, but it's not so easy to leave.
Old.
If you're from Iowa, I'm like both sorry and not. I don't know. The last one I have on my list, and I promise that I will be done, is
Oh, take
gerrymandering, which
your
is something that's like super big in this election because we just had the census. And the
time.
census is what redistricts areas to decide like how much voting influence they have, how much financial benefits they receive, how much funding for education, healthcare, public services, public works they get. And something that the Trump administration has tried to do and has failed at doing, luckily, but is always kind of a threat from the Republican candidates, is this adding a question, because the census is aimed to include everyone, citizen, not citizen, doesn't matter. If you live here and are like participating in life here, like you need services and you need to be counted in the census. So the Trump administration is trying to add a "Are you a citizen?" question, which I feel like I remember seeing when I filled it out, but I could be misremembering.
I don't remember.
But the ACLU actually blocked it, which is good. But it's kind of something that comes up every census, that people are trying to put that back on there to kind of take power away from the districts that do have large immigrant and honestly like non-English speaking communities, because they want to like put fear into them by being like, oh, if you mark that you're not a citizen on this form, now we know where you are. ICE is such a big thing in this country that's like terrifying. They
Yeah.
literally have children in cages. So I think the census has like a lot of threat to it, especially if you include that citizenship question. It means much more than I guess like some white lady in a place that doesn't understand things would know. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like you don't really understand the weight if you've not experienced it, but people need to. Because essentially it takes all voting oomph from that area, because it says that your population is less. And we know how messed up the electoral college is. It's all totally based on population. And if you're not counted in the census and you're not counted in redistricting, essentially you don't get that number of a person included in the overall count of humans that would go towards how many seats you get in the electoral college, which is already a flawed system.
Yeah.
So it kind of all ties together. Luckily, the ACLU again was able to stop that from happening, but it's something that's kind of like an always big threat. And I think just the census in general, like people are scared to fill it out because of ICE's like huge presence in this country and how terrifying and very real like the violence and danger that they present is. So I feel like it probably did hinder census participation, despite the fact that the citizenship question wasn't on there, just because it's not, as you said, Gabe, like the language translation isn't there. And it really depends on where you are, because I know in Philly I did receive a like a Spanish written out copy with my ballot, but I know that probably doesn't happen everywhere. It really kind of depends on the area that you live in. And there's probably lots of places where that is not included and people kind of just don't have the information they need to
Yeah,
kind of
it's a
have their
mix
voice heard.
of lack of information, but it's also there's many intimidation tactics happening, like what we saw with the Trump supporters, in their all of a sudden they can be on the highway, right? But before, blocking the
Yep.
highway was a big deal. But yeah, I think
Hmm.
there's a lot, and it really does stem to a fear that if we did count all votes, that our democracy would look a little different, because like we said from the beginning, it was, like the electoral college is put in place so that, certain votes count more than others, obviously. I mean, that's where we got the 3/5 compromise, right? Is that we didn't want to count these people as full people, which is wrong. Why do we hold on to things that were so like blatantly connected to this? And I think, um, similar to what you said about the 25 days and looking back to paper ballots, there's a lot of systems that we still are upholding that are archaic and are, were brought up at the time with the founding fathers in a different like world, right? Like that was before
Yeah.
people had information that was readily available. Like you had a lot of populations who were uneducated and couldn't read and couldn't make, you know, fully informed, educated decisions. And we also had people who weren't fully free or consider that. Like we live in a time now, luckily, that, I can vote as a brown woman, but that was not always the case. And so we've made changes. And I think we need to continue to do that if we want to see a future, because right now the way that the system works, it really is forcing us to be a two-party system, which, as someone who did vote for Bernie and has been a Bernie fan for this whole time, really felt like, we don't have it in our system that allows for any third-party candidates. Like that, it is impossible with the electoral
Mhm.
college to get enough votes to even matter. And so then it really makes it that, our votes don't matter at the end of the day, right? So, kind of in a breakdown of the electoral college and why it's unhelpful, I found this super helpful video especially for someone like me who it takes a lot of like repetitive information for me to understand politics quite often. So I'm always just like, thank you
Yeah.
for, dumbing this down, explain it to me like I'm five, Reddit thread. But there's this great YouTube channel
Mhm.
called Above the Noise, that is super informative. And they explained, that California gets 55 electoral votes for 37.3 million people, which means that's about one elector per 680,000 people in California. Whereas Wyoming gets 3 votes for 568,000 people, so that's one elector per 189,000. So people feel, and reasonably so, that a vote in Wyoming counts far more than a vote in California. And keeping in mind that 1 in 8 people that live in the US live in California, which is why traffic is awful there. But it's absolutely absurd that we're still kind of holding to these policies that made sense to the founding fathers during that time when they didn't have the population sizes. They had no way of knowing that the world would look the way that it is. And there's a lot of archaic things that we talk about on our show, specifically, tying back to classism and capitalism and just the inherent racist systems that we have in place in America. But I think one of the issues is the electoral college. And there's no way that we could get rid of it completely, and it wouldn't necessarily fix all of our problems. In fact, it would probably make it worse for some rural areas in America that would then get neglected, and because they would pander to the larger populated areas, and also we would need a constitutional amendment for that, and that's like what, 2/3 majority Congress, 3/4 state approval,
Yeah, we haven't
which,
agreed on a thing in a while.
yeah, I don't see America
Even
coming
there.
together to fix it up. So, and that's why the little votes that we can do, and so that we can shift the power in Congress and in our states to hopefully get to a place where that conversation can even be had, is what's important. Like I know that a lot of us feel like our vote doesn't matter and that it's a waste of time. But I think the big part of it is like, one, you do have to vote or you should vote if you can. There's so many people who can't. And like thinking about all of Puerto Rico, right? They can't make these decisions for what affects them. And so it's like, you can vote, then do it, and go out there and do it, but don't let it stop at voting. Like no matter who wins, this election, like there's still so many things in place that need to change and we need to stop for. So if you are feeling impassioned and empowered during this time, or even feeling hopeless and scared because of how horrific it is, right? Use that to propel yourself forward, to get involved and get educated and continue the fight outside of just the polling place, because that's really where those changes are going to be made. Because we can, flip whoever's in office. We can kind of get our sea of blue if you want the sea of blue. We can, hopefully get some aid for the virus that's going on, and also financially, and also take people seriously and see people as people, which is what we could hope for. But you also have to kind of make moves other than just November 3rd. You
Yeah.
gotta
There's
do
also
it, right? Every 4 years.
Yeah, there's also other elections that actually your vote makes significantly more of an impact, specifically like legislative branches of the government that are voting in like local issues. So like legislation that would be passed. So when you're voting for the one that's in May, or like the one that lots of people don't vote during the non-presidential elections, and that's a huge problem because they're the ones making the local decisions in your community. That's how Philly is how it is. It's how you would nominate your city council people. Those are the people passing law in like your specific area of life. So that one, if anything, if you don't feel like your vote matters in a presidential election, it will matter in a local election, because those are things that definitely directly impact you, especially in the horrific end of if we got 4 more years of Trump, that things will be decided largely at a state level. So you need to know what's happening in your state government. You need to know what's happening in your local legislative government and city council and city itself, because that's the people that will be making these big decisions on gay marriage and uh, abortion rights and women's rights and all of
Yeah.
that. So make sure you vote in the other ones too. I've only ever missed one, is what the voting
Yeah.
mail card told me. And I was like, what was I doing? I was like, oh, I lived in New Jersey. Okay. It was a temporary.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. They're, so this is a part of, Philly Cam's People Power Media Fest, which, as if you're a listener of the Ghouls, you know that I love Philly Cam. It is a part of my heart and soul. And the People Power Media Fest is created as our way to kind of celebrate our community, but also educate and inform and empower our community through media, right? Which is what we always strive to do. Specifically, this series, What's at Stake, which is closing out this evening, was featuring, our Philly Cam members who talked on their shows about like what is at stake, what is going to be affected, like what are we really voting for, right? And so at the end of the day, it's exactly what you said. It's what we've been covering this whole year and being very vocal about, right? It is, that Black Lives Matter, that we need to stick up for our LGBTQIA community, especially now that, Amy Coney Barrett is up there. Women's rights, now that we've lost RBG, right? Like there are so many things that we are personally affected by in our lives that we're seeing really kind of up on the chopping block, or in danger, more than it has been in a while. And so like when you think of what's at stake, it's a lot. It is like our future being, pushed back years and years, into the dark ages of time when, we didn't matter as much, or people like who look like me didn't matter as much. And so we need to, make sure that we're fighting back against that, because there is so much at stake during this.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we can loosen up a little and instead complain about some hate.
Never.
Yeah, it's not quite. It's pretty accurate.
I'm still gonna
Um,
say stuff.
yeah, I found, watching this when we were watching it, Purge election year, I was like, every time we watch something like this, like when we watch the first Purge, when we watch Watchmen, like over again, when we watch Lovecraft Country,
Mhm.
like when we're watching a lot of the media that is, has come out in the past few years, it is so real. Like it is so much like outside, right? Like we can walk outside and
Yeah.
experience almost the same thing. I mean, of course, it's um, you know overdone and it's crazy because it's horror, but it is so real. And I think, in the past few years, this was from 2016, so this was the first time we were staring at a potential Trump presidency, right? And had no idea that this is what would come of it. But our media has really, one, horror has always, been a vocal piece about what us as a society are afraid of and what we're confronting. But I feel like in recent years, we've been very, very obvious about what those horrors are. And it does tend to be those things that we said are at stake. So, for people who don't know, Purge election years from 2016. It is directed by James DeMonico and also written by him. And it is about former police sergeant Barnes becomes head of security for Senator Charlie Rowan, a presidential candidate targeted for death on Purge night due to her vow to eliminate the purge. So this is the third in the series, I'm pretty sure. And so it's it's doing a lot. It's doing a lot, and it definitely was
Yeah.
uh, DeMonico's attempt at really turning this franchise on its head and making it, elevated horror, as people are calling it, right? Like more purposeful horror. And I think he gets it right by the fourth one, which is the first Purge. Like I think he finally does it. When we talked about the first Purge, which is the fourth one, it really dove headfirst into confronting some of the real life implications of the Purge universe, whereas like the original Purge film was just a home invasion with an absurd background plot of a one night a year legal crime situation. But it really is just like an interesting home invasion. Like if you took out the Purge and it was just that like I don't even know. Like, the Purge could have been a twist like Shyamalan situation, right? It really was not even that
We've
relevant to
been in
what's
the
going
real
on.
world the whole time.
Yeah, like it could have been The Village. Like honestly, like that's kind
Yeah.
of what it felt. Um, but I feel like this film really took the idea of if this, then what, and created an actual like honest representation of what a purge world looks like. And
Yeah.
like what we see, like what we saw in the first Purge, again, which is the fourth one, that is the prequel. So it shows how the Purge came into be. It's the first Purge that ever happened, and it really does address that if a purge were to exist in the world, it would exist to further marginalize, harm, and eradicate an entire group of people under the guise of law and order, which America has done since the beginning of its existence, 400 years of this, right? So it sounds eerily familiar, but when we are thinking about our society, it makes an obvious jump that if purge existed, that's why it would. And I think that's what's really beautiful about that film is that it, one, it features BIPOC characters at the forefront, and it takes place in a lower income area. It really highlights like that there's a revolution, that there are people protesting this, that are seeing it and calling it out for what it is. And I think Purge election year was like the first step that we got into it, that we got to see the powers that be, and it wasn't just like if one night a year you could murder, would you? And all that. It was actually like we made this because we want an excuse to rid our country of a specific population or a few specific populations so that we can further our rhetoric. So in this one we follow a woman, so it's like, oh yay, ladies in charge, such progress.
Hmm.
2016, what hopes
Lots
and
of
dreams
strong
we
female
had.
characters for sure.
And I mean and Senator Charlie definitely is strong, and there are parts like she's like a very tropey hero character of like, yeah, I believe in good, and that's that. Like I'm
I didn't
acknowledging
like her.
that there's flaws, but yeah, she's like, there's other stuff, but she herself had lost her family to the purge, who to this psychopath who was just acting out his patriotic duties of murdering families, and so because of that, she wishes to end the purge for good, which like I get it, um, but it really feels like no more killing perfectly nice white families, as opposed to the real revolution that's happening on the sidelines, which should have been at the forefront of this story, which is like actually, we need to talk about how it is strategically singling out lower income BIPOC and other marginalized community to like hurt them. Like, and later we do see that there's some refuge for them and that they are very clearly aware that they're the target. We even see foreigners come in to get a taste of the American dream to kill our deplorable communities. But
Hmm. Specifically, like European.
yeah, yeah. I, I think they were Russian, actually. I
I
think the
think it was a
ones who were,
mix, but yeah, all the
like,
political figures, masks.
yeah, maybe they were German. It was like, yeah, and they come in and they were wearing like the Lady Liberty and Uncle Sam and Ben and Abraham Lincoln and all them, uh, which
Yeah,
is
Nixon.
funny. But yeah, so the film more or less follows her, Senator Rowan, who is opposing the new founding fathers, um, Tea Party, and their old fashioned, racism, white supremacy, blatant fascism. There's a lot of Nazi imagery everywhere. And like it is not pretending to be anything else. Um, and they aim to kill her because she wants to call off the purge, and she's doing a good job as like, one of like she definitely spins this narrative and is clear about why it's a problem, not just to her, like not just that her family died, but also that it is, disproportionately harming these communities. But I think that Senator Rowan really isn't the hero of this story and shouldn't have been. And I think that's where the flaw came from. And that's what like really made us upset when we were watching it. Because again, on the sidelines, and unfortunately, spoiler alert, we get another sacrificial Black character. And in fact, we get all of the people of color in this film are sacrificial for this white lady, trope that we get in horror quite a bit. But there's a real revolutionary hero who's igniting a movement and helping those in need and executing Link, a plan to fight back in the only way that us non-upper middle class white ladies can do, and that's Dante Bishop, who is a Black man who is, moving forward this revolution and, creating a safe space for people. We see him like with his like underground base where there's unhoused communities. There's just people from these small areas that could not afford to protect themselves the way that Senator Rowan assumingly could have if, there weren't people against her.
In her
And
team. Yeah.
yeah, right. And he appears on several news outlets calling for the end of the purge and like highlights all of the real injustices that are going on in there and like actually has a plan to go and like murder the new founding fathers to end the purge. And so he and his team are demanding blood for blood. They want to not just enact revenge, but they have been harmed and continuously like since the beginning of the purge, right, that we see in the first purge, have been the true victims of this entire policy. And so he thinks that, this is how we can do it. We have like we're tired of being murdered, which rings a little too close to home right now, right? And so Senator Charlie is continually fighting back against that, saying that it'll make him a martyr. And even though she's like almost killed a bunch of times, she still fights for him to stay alive, like the founding fathers. And she kind of pulls a Batman of like, if you murder a murderer, then the number of murderers is the same. To which I
Yeah.
say, Batman, not if you kill two murderers. Then it's down. Then you keep going down
Yeah.
because you still are only one murderer. Anyway, I digress. Um, I think, it I think Bishop is impassioned, and watching his people murdered in the street legally has, really inspired him to fight back, and I think he has every right to. And so I think her continuously like absurdly, demanding compassion from him for people who will never show that to him or people that look like him is a problem. And I think that's like it's like I feel like if we were to, redo this film or to show it now, like in present day, after seeing the way that the world is, like Bishop would be at the helm, which is I think why in the first Purge, the fourth film, he does have all those BIPOC at the forefront, because he was like, no, we need to actually see their point of view, because they're the real heroes. It just is
Yeah.
unfortunate it's the heroes that we see as a prequel, and not the heroes that bring about the change, like that we're still, putting all our hopes on this white woman who ultimately let us down in 2016 both times. It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so, I mean, honestly, I feel like this film is an extremely parallel film to what is happening in the world. Specifically, like I've watched this film twice actually, and the first time I saw it, it did not hit me in the way that it did the second time. And the like, I hated her the first time too, but I extra disliked her character so much the second time because it's just the more you learn, the more you notice things. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it was framed the way that it was intentionally, honestly, because that is a reflection of what society does. They pick their favorite white person who fits this mold in the Democratic Party or whatever, to be the candidate. And it's like you have to pick, I hate to quote South Park, but between like a douche and a turd sandwich. Like, as John Mulaney recently said, you pick a rich white old guy, and he's the president, and he doesn't, like, his impact is less monumental than the parties underneath of it, like the people in Congress, in the House of Representatives. He is a figure that represents what the population that has maintained power for a long time. So you
Mm-hmm.
get this whole their Trump in the film is this like really over like zealot, religious zealot, clearly racist white supremacist dude who's a bumbling idiot when it comes to talking in public, who kind of just repeats the same slogans, same things every time, which is literally like watching TV now. And you have this
Mm-hmm.
candidate who is the only choice because there are no other choices that have been allowed to the people.
Yeah.
This woman is the only choice to end this awful thing, but is only the first step. And she is by no means the hero. The entire time, I'm not like, I don't want her to die, but I need her to like act like she knows what a threat is, because she is not acting like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that
Or
she
to like
knew that
not
she
demand
could,
them.
hmm but the fact that she knew that she could be in a bunker and chose to not, because of how it would look to the public, is like, that is your privilege right there. You could have been protected. You chose not to do that, and instead to put people's lives at risk who you claim are the people you're trying to protect. You're fine if all of them die for you, and then you're really ready to like defend this really bigoted of man who represents this organization that's actively harming this population. You walk into every room like you own the place because, white lady, you think you do. Like, that's the whole thing, the whole entire time. She is the worst, but she is
Mm-hmm.
better than the evil. Like, that is
Yeah.
the only reason that she is considered the hero. She is just like not the worst thing.
Yeah.
There's
And
there's a slightly worse thing than her.
yeah, yeah, or like, yeah, it is sad, because like when we think back to 2016, right, like that was almost the same feelings that we had, right, like Hillary is not
Hmm.
the best option that we could ever have, and definitely wasn't our first choice, but again, it was, that's what we can do, like that's the step forward we can get, because it's not like we can take that leap, like there's no way that Bishop is ever going to get to be, important enough to make this same revolutionary change that Charlie is, kind of showing herself to be able to do. All right. And it's unfortunately like she is that next step. Like she is a step so that later, hopefully, we could get a bishop who has power. Right. Like, but
Yeah.
we couldn't do that unless Charlie does first, which is like, that's the history of this country. Right. It's like, we get the white man and we
Hmm.
get the white ladies and then we get the black men, and then it's like later, we get black women, we get Asian women, then we get Hispanic women, like we are like, towards the end where we have to let them kind of go first so that people can
Yeah.
see, oh,
Well,
we get a
technically,
different.
we've never had a white woman as president, but yes.
Yeah.
But yes, it's generally the order that basically, you know, it's honestly still slated to benefit men, uh, but that, you
Mhm.
know, the white men are the first. We haven't seen white woman yet, but I think it's fine if we don't. But also that I hope we find a woman to put in office,
Yeah,
primarily is my
which is, I
goal.
mean,
But I
why?
think in the next purge, the first purge, that's when we kind of get that spotlight on like this heroic, you know, black family, like black community that's fighting this.
Mhm.
But I agree with you; it would have been cool to have like, because they were the best part of the movie, and they were
Yeah,
fodder, and it was sad.
and it definitely, like, yeah, as seasoned horror watchers that we are, as soon as we saw these POC characters, and because you see her first, as soon as we saw them pull up, I was like, they are gonna sacrifice themselves for her. Like, there's no way that they're not gonna do that. And it was absolutely
Hmm.
absurd. Like, there's the one immigrant who seems to know more about American politics than the black people that he works with. And, you know, as soon as he started talking about, like, oh, she just needs to win Florida and all this, I was like, he's gonna kill himself. Like, he's gonna put himself in harm's way for her. And it made me so upset. And also, you know, the owner of the store, there's like all these other side stories that don't really matter. But as soon as he showed up, I was like, he is gonna die. There's no way. They made him, they
Luckily,
made him a crip.
spoilers, he didn't. But yeah,
Well, the black man did, didn't he?
yes, he did. But
Both of
what was
them.
his name? No, the leader of the rebellion died,
Yeah,
and Joe, the owner of the
yeah,
store, who was the black man, died. But
yeah.
what was the other guy's name? Because he didn't die. He took over the store.
Yes, but he was definitely in that same thing, and there, and definitely when Bishop
Hmm.
died, that was really like it for me, because it was like definitely at the end of the film. I
Hmm.
guess this is from 2016. Uh, he like he unnecessarily like went on a suicide mission to
Hmm.
protect Charlie, but like her bodyguard, given that that's his literal job, should have done that.
He should have died. Hmm.
Yeah, because
It
he's
shouldn't have been
nothing.
him.
He's a nothing person. He's not going to keep this revolution going. Like, Bishop needs to be there to keep the
Yeah,
other revolution. Like, she's doing like all the political stuff, but we need someone who's also like
on the
supporting the movement
ground.
for the people who care. Yeah, and continuing
Hmm.
that. And we've seen how, you know, America cuts down, you know, our POC leaders who are fighting for change, and how that can derail an
Yeah,
entire movement. We saw that with the Black
it's been
Panthers, right?
happening
Like, we
in
see that
Philly.
now, yeah, with hashtag
Yeah.
free ants, which, yeah, like we
Hmm.
it is strategic, right? And unfortunately it's what the strategy was used for this film. uh and
Yeah.
it's just replicating the same tired things that we see in horror all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would say, you
Exhausting.
know, yes, I would say I did enjoy the film. I think there was some fun parts of it. It's very Purge-esque, where it has, you know, very outlandish costumes and violence, and, you know, there's the whole, like, the car that was all wrapped up in lights, and the girls came out in their
Yeah.
tutus and their bedazzled guns, and I was
How do they
like,
keep
that's
those
cute.
lights on?
I was like, how do they see where they're
Where does
going?
that plug
Um,
into?
what are you doing? But they're doing it, and in that whole scene, like, they always have characters where I'm like, this person needs mental help. We don't have those systems in place. Instead, we made the purge, but somehow that's going to equal people getting help. No, that's not how that works. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it is it is a fun film. I think it is really real right now. It does hit very close to home with what is going on outside our doors, which seems to be happening a lot with media. Which is like, I'm happy to see that. I'm happy that we're getting media that isn't afraid to kind of say those things, and I hope that, you know, if we get
Hmm.
more purges in the future or other things like that, that we can continue to be so deliberate. Um,
Yeah.
but it is what it is.
Yeah. No, that's real. And I mean, the real life things that are really scary right now. One, the election. Two, the fact that in Kentucky recently there were police training releases that had like Mein Kampf and Hitler quotes to motivate violence.
Mm-hmm.
So if you haven't read that, that'll make you want to throw up. Um, there's a lot at stake. I think we're way closer to Handmaid's Tale than anyone's willing to give credit for. You need to vote in your local offices because that is the only protection we really have if Biden doesn't win. Even if Biden doesn't win or does win, you still need to do that because he is only a small little skip step in a positive direction. It is not the end of the fighting. It is not the end of the slow burn revolution we find ourselves in currently. And like as you said, there's so many people as free ant like there's people on the ground right now who are being intentionally taken out for bullcrap reasons and are being set up. Like it's there's a long history of that specifically in America and I'm sure other places too, but it's all very intentional and people need to follow what's happening in the world around them. It is really overwhelming. But I learned this thing when I was in college, and it was about a philosopher that said, "Inaction is action," and it is. You by not making
Mhm.
an action, you are making a definitive choice that you do not wish to help others in the world, and that's not how the philosopher aimed it, but that is how I kind of interpreted in the last 2 days. Like inaction is a definitive choice that other people do not matter,
Yeah,
and that a vote for Trump if you love somebody who is of the LGBTQIA, who is a person or a person of color or BIPOC community, you do not love them because
yeah,
the things that those people are doing are intentionally hurting the people that you claim that you love, and inaction is not an option right now if we want to have a country that doesn't destroy everything we love.
yeah. Yeah, and it's like it's also
So
like
vote.
even if we see, the results of this election and Biden does win and we have a Biden Kamala, in the White House, that doesn't mean that the part like it's over, right? Like cuz again, like you said, there's so many things that Biden stands for that aren't good or like aren't really in favor of people. I mean, even with Kamala, like there are victories to be had, but that's not the end of the battle. And so,
Mhm.
after you get out your vote, we also have to continue that. Like we have to push that energy
Yeah.
forward because we have a lot of systems in place right now that are harming people that we care about in making this not a free country, right? And it is doing what it
Mhm.
was set up to do, which is to harm us and only cater to a very specific small population. And so we need to continue doing it. Like, don't get like,
Yeah.
comfortable and placated. Don't think that a Biden win equals win for the whole country. That's not true, right? Like we still have so much
Yeah.
that we have to fight for, and we cannot sit back and, ignore what's going on outside our doors. And so continuing on to do that, to make this fight, like in no way would the purge exist, but things like the purge, just not as obvious in your face as like go and murder people, are existing because people are going and murdering people and not being
There
held accountable. It
yeah.
is the purge.
Yeah.
It just happens
I
every
mean,
day
yeah,
instead of
there's literal internment camps that house children. There are black people getting murdered by police officers with no consequences. Like just because Biden, if Biden wins, racism and homophobia are not gone now. Like it is ever present. So for everyone who's like, this is it, we just gotta get him in, and then it's done. It's like no, because the white moderate will be the reason that nothing good happens, and everyone needs to just stay angry. Do it afraid, as you say, Gabe, as your one
yeah.
student said. Like
That's what my friend
we
said.
need
Yeah,
to, we need to just like stop being convenient. Convenience is basically the reason why nothing changes. So I'm
hmm
sorry for everyone who loves their Dunkin' Donuts iced coffees, but people need to make sacrifices, and they need to be willing to do that for other people. Inaction is action. It's basically telling everyone that needs help to go F themselves, and it makes me
yeah. Well, so then I hope what you
angry.
get from this episode and the rest of the What's at Stake content is, inspiration to continue fighting the good fight and, making a difference and, educating yourself on what is going on out there. So, making sure you check out phillycam.org to look at the People Power Media Fest to see what else is going on. We have some really great, panels. We have a town hall if you're a PhillyCam member and alike to really talk about some of the issues going on in our city. And if you enjoyed our content and you do want to check out our episode on the Fourth Purge, which is the First Purge, and Watchmen, Lovecraft Country, Candyman, we had a whole, very political summer with our content. So if you enjoyed this, check us out at theGhoulsNextDoor.com or on YouTube, The Ghouls Next Door, and you can see videos like this. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you stick around for Hear Us Out, which is our youth radio program, which will be covering the election as well. And let's hope that we at least get a step forward and away from a potential purge, because who knows? All right, so as we say, don't get married. Delete your kids. So weird out of context.
Yeah.